Welcome back to the Mythic Dungeon International's Spring Finals, live in Sydney, Australia, as we move on into the lower finals game between Method NA and Abrakeydabra. I'm Jack, and join me right now for the series. We've got Sloot, Nagura, and Sours, and with Team D getting eliminated, it means it's nothing but the West competing for those BlizzCon spots. And Abrakeydabra, I mean, they're going to have to get really comfy in their seats here, Nagura.
Yeah, so they have to play 3 games in a row here. So they're going to be very exhausted. We've seen Jay doing the interview. He looked like he's exhausted. He looked like they've been working all night, playing all day since they're here in Sydney. And just 3 games in a row is just so much for them.
And then if they win that one, they're going to be going into a best-of-5 series against Method EU, which would be sure to be a grueling challenge for them. So Team D getting eliminated, dropped out. This lower final matchup not only is going to see who goes into the grand final, but by doing so, Sloot, they're also going to be qualifying for BlizzCon.
Yeah, I mean, it's kind of a two-pronged desire here for the teams, right? They have the relief of getting to BlizzCon. You know, just like Method EU said yesterday, you know, they were all about winning from the get-go, but then on the bus here, on the way here yesterday, it kind of really hit them. They're like, hey, we could be going to BlizzCon, you know, full accommodations paid, everything carried by Blizzard here, so that'd be great. So these teams is starting to sink in. It's not just about the prize money. It's about that BlizzCon placement at the end of the year. So these two teams are right on the cusp of on their way to getting both.
That's right, and on their cusp to greatness and to victory. Let's take it over to Fist on stage and see what she's got on these guys.
Thanks, Jack. Abrakeydabra were way more scared of Team D than Method NA, but only because these dungeons favor them better. Abrakeydabra is obviously exhausted, but they feel they've played well overall, and they've made no major mistakes. And now we get to see that spicy Waycrest strat. Method NA believe that they can beat Abrakeydabra as long as they don't make any big mistakes. They're nervous though because today is the first day that they've actually practiced Waycrest for this tournament, and Shakib is usually the one who's their explosive killer, but when they play double rogue, but he has to go DK for this one. We know that Waycrest is going to be incredibly spicy. Are you ready for this, Jack?
Oh, I'm ready for it indeed. Thank you so much for that one, Fist. And Waycrest Manor, explosive Sours. This one has been a lot of fun because there is so much trash density in it. There's been so many aggressive pulls. And it always kind of reminds me, like, the biggest thing that shows how difficult this dungeon can be has been that 40k pull when they moved into Rawl's room. It took forever because they had to kill so many explosives and you don't really know how many will spawn.
Oh yeah, Unholy Death Knight is great at killing a lot of things all at once and really bad at killing things one at a time, especially explosive orbs. And if Shakib is their main explosive dealer and he's also their Unholy Death Knight, that's not a good position for these guys to be because we've actually seen them lose dungeons before failing to kill explosive orbs in the past.
Yeah, and this might actually favor Abrakeydabra, because they're playing this comp where they play a Mistweaver, so they can keep the 2 rogues, and they don't need the Windwalker plus rogue plus DK. And with 2 rogues and an explosive dungeon, you just have so many things to kill the explosive with, because we know that rogues are very good at killing them too.
Yeah, and even with the Mistweaver Monk, the quick Rising Sun kick will be able to one-shot them every single time, and even if he's putting a Blackout kick into it, it should be okay as well. And Sloot, a lot of pressure going to be on the tank, not only for some of that explosive, but you're dealing with a lot of these mobs teaming going into it. There's going to be a lot of times you're pulling into the boss, so even things like Raw, your movement's going to be pretty restricted.
Jack, you were too excited about this Mistweaver. I mean,
if there was a prop paladin, Sloot, don't say you wouldn't be excited.
I'd be very excited.
Every hair on your head would stick up.
Just careful, Jack. You're on thin ice now. So yeah, look, tank damage compared to some of the other dungeons that we've seen, some of the other affix combos in these dungeons, and I can't really say it's the most dangerous. Innately, this dungeon has a lot of tank danger, especially in the wing with the triad. But you know, there's none of these affixes really come to mind that are extremely dangerous for tanking. Outside, of course, you have teaming, so there's just more stuff hitting you, but nothing too out of hand. No spike damage and raging coming in or anything like that. So the tank damage really just comes in the form of how dangerous are you making these pulls in terms of mass rune pull. Are we doing? We know that they, at least unless they change their strategy, and Nagura's already bobbing her head at this, we know that they don't do the 60% reaping plus all of Rawl's rune pull plus Raw. They just committed to not do the reaping on top of that. So already compared to some of the more dangerous pulls and strategies we've seen throughout Cup play, they're not doing that.
That's right, they're not. And having with the Mistweaver Monk in particular is also kind of interesting. We've seen a number of different pulls in Nagura where you have to be able to move your healer off onto, you know, a high ledge, off into a corner. Even if you're just getting a little bit of Sunfire, Moonfire damage, we've seen so many times where it's still 10, 15k DPS. Having your Monk out in any of those corners, you're not dealing anything. You're just getting a little bit of Crackling Jade Lightning. So we've seen a couple times in particular where healer damage has helped decide games.
Yeah, definitely. I think Abra's setup is a little bit on the safer side, right? Because they do have the 2 rogues, so it's easier to kill the explosives, but they're probably going to lose a little bit of damage just because having less damage from the healer, as you said, especially when the healer can't really be in melee range at all. And then on top of that, you just have, just in general, less damage from Mistweaver compared to a Raster Druid. So I think it's just a little bit of a safer strategy that they're playing, and maybe it works out for them because we all know Waycrest is a dangerous dungeon, especially if you do those huge pulls that we've been seeing from the teams in the past. So we'll see how it works out for them. And Method NA really hasn't played this map at all before, and they also said they haven't practiced it that much, so they probably want to play it something safer as well.
That was one thing in particular I want to be able to focus in on. Method NA was really wanting to focus on looking what other teams were doing for their Waycrest strategy, see what they could be able to pick up, see what they would be able to adopt for their own. Because how are you able to properly practice for something if you know that it's going to be the day 3 game 1 or something like that, but you might be super experienced on the other one, Sours?
Yeah, because of the path that Method NA ended up taking through this tournament, this is the one and only time they would even have to encounter Waycrest Manor. But the next dungeon is Freehold and then Atal'Dazar. And Freehold is one of the dungeons that Method NA is the most confident in, and their Atal'Dazar time has been very impressive as well. And we've seen a lot of teams, for some reason, struggling in the Atal'Dazar affix combination this time around. So I think the strategy that they have of maybe kind of unpreparing for Waycrest Manor, as long as they don't let a defeat here bog them down, and they understand that, okay, we're kind of throwing this one away. Maybe we weren't quite so ready for Waycrest Manor, but we have the superior Freehold. We have the superior Atal'Dazar. All we have to do is execute those 2 perfectly. Then they should be okay. Maybe this will be the second 3-game series in a row, and that would be phenomenal.
Be absolutely amazing to be able to see. And it seems like that overall they're keeping it light. They're keeping it fun right now. And as you mentioned, it feels like at the very beginning of the season, we were even talking about Method NA coming out with incredibly good time trials the very first weekend slew. They were absolutely crushing Atal'Dazar, and even though the affixes have definitely changed around a lot since then, when you have that dungeon you're always kind of comfortable for, you're always very confident, and it really goes the distance for you.
Yeah, I mean, it does, but, a lot has changed since then, and we're just not in that kind of environment anymore where week in, week out, you're either doing time trial or cup play, etc. And Atal'Dazar is just, Jack, you and I have always talked about this, even back in the Legion dungeons. You kind of have those early staple dungeons, HOV comes to mind, Darkheart Thicket comes to mind in Legion, and for this expansion, it's really been this Atal'Dazar. It's like the first dungeon everyone saw. Everybody's so well practiced, and there's so many routes we've seen come out of it that you almost expect teams to always be perfect. So it always surprises us so much when there's hiccups because teams start biting off really more than they can chew in these dungeons.
Well, I think in some ways it's also pushing themselves to innovate. I mean, like you mentioned, early on, teams were more than comfortable just to start skipping through the Colossus section. Now they're really capitalizing in on it.
Yeah, no, the Colossus pull is fantastic. Don't you agree, Nagura?
I 100% agree. No, I agree that it's good to go that side. I don't agree to actually pull the Colossi because we've seen actually a strategy from Method U where they do go to Priestess first, but then they don't pull the Colossi. So they just take those difficult mobs out of the way, but they still take the superior route where they have the better reaping timing. So that's something I really like from Method U. And the one thing to note as well is that I wonder if any of the other teams actually copied this strategy because they did have 2 days basically to prepare the Method U strat. But then it might just be too big of a change for them to learn it here.
I also saw just today that in 8.2, the Colossi are completely different in this dungeon where they no longer get healed to full whenever you kill a troll around them. Instead, they only gain like a 10% damage buff as opposed to healing to full and getting a 25% damage buff. So maybe killing the Colossi is, they're ahead of the times. They know the future of this dungeon, the future strategies, but we'll have to even get to a game 3 to see if that's even possible. But back into this Waycrest Manor, the fortified in Waycrest Manor is so brutal, and we've only really ever seen people do the exact same thing every time in this dungeon where, right, so in when you do this dungeon on live, the doors you get are random. However, for MDI Cups, we're always going to be giving the teams the top left route to promote fairness and tournament integrity. And so there's only so much variation you can do once you get into the courtyard of this dungeon. And when you're dealing with explosive orbs, it even limits your options further. So seeing how big and how brave these teams can manage to go and how big they're able to pull once they get past the triad of witches is going to be really important to seeing who's actually able to win this dungeon.
But the thing with we're in a tyrannical setting, if I'm not mistaken, in Waycrest, right? Not fortified. Yeah. But the thing is, a lot of these teams start to limit. We mentioned, for instance, on the side of Abrakeydabra, they're not doing the 60% reaping plus rolls room plus roll, just because at a certain point they are too scared of explosive management. Now, explosive management of the 60% Reaping Wave plus all of Rawl's trash as opposed to just all of Rawl's trash, it doesn't matter because Reaping doesn't spawn extra explosives. So I'm not really sure why they're kind of holding a bit back on that, but it is a gamble at the end of the day. I mean, you can have a mass pull spawn barely any explosives, or you can have a mass pull constantly spawn explosives, and at this stage in the tournament, it might just have to be a gamble you try and do to win.
And they play the double rogue too, right? So they do have more damage for the explosives. It may be just be because, of course, if you have Reaping, then there's a lot of nameplates. And we all know from live servers, as soon as there's a million nameplates, you just maybe if your eye's not set up 100% properly, you don't see this explosive or you can't click on it. And maybe they're just struggling with that with the explosive in general. Maybe that's why they choose not to.
Well, one thing Shakib's not going to be struggling with is getting amped up for the boys here. After his interview, we know he wants to be able to do well for them, and having that debut kind of in that LAN environment for him, Sour, has got to be very exciting.
Oh, yeah. Hopefully, we got a lot of Shakib comfy going on in the chat. You know, Shakib's going to be getting comfy on the stage. Hopefully, they're able to all get comfortable in this dungeon because there's so many things can go wrong. And we've seen, like, mistakes will compound on other mistakes, and teams can kind of really just, like, oh, you messed up the first 5 minutes of the dungeon. Okay, well, now you're going to mess up at 10 minutes as well, and maybe even at 15. But so as long as they can, you know, all play well and win this series, then we can see them all updating their stream titles with, you know, MDI qualified team. I can see the Dr. J title now. Think about all those brackets in that title.
What was that? Was JB doing the baby shark dance, or what was going on the desk there?
I think it was like a snake dance there, something like that.
That's terrifying.
Pre-game ritual.
Hey, everybody's going to have one. We heard about yours, Nagura. But as we're going in, we are ready to go with Game 1 in the closest poll we've seen yet. 52% for Abrakeydabra and 48% for Method NA as we start up the series in Waycrest Manor.
In Waycrest Manor we go. Clash of the Titans once again here. And right out the get-go, you know, we're going to see, one of two strategies. We're going to pull these essences with us, or are we not? We see speed pods coming out of both teams right now as they head over to the top left. And we've seen usually a pretty aggressive strategy coming out of them where they grab a lot of trash on top of the Triad, which we're seeing Abrakeydabra do here right now.
Yeah, we see both of the teams going straight to the Triad boss here, popping that Boralus, pulling all of the trash from the left and the right. Of course, just the DK damage is going to matter so much, as you can see for Method NA. Specifically, Shakib just doing so much damage here to start. Shine just holding his damage a little bit, as you can see in there. Maybe he didn't pop his cooldowns yet. Maybe he's saving him for a little bit later. But yeah, the DK damage is showing off here.
DK damage is showing off a big time right now as both of the teams pretty much rifle through the trash, and they're neck and neck right now as they get started on Sister Malady, the second sister in the rotation. Now they have to work, as we already know, down to 50% on each one in rotation. It goes to Lena Malady and then Briar at the bottom. So neck in neck for these two teams, just 1% ahead. And it's really going to be the min-max that comes to play for these two teams, Nagura. Making sure that you get the spell reflect in every 25 seconds for the bolt cast from the sisters, getting every interrupt in, just keeping mobs localized in the courtyard when we get there. It's going to be really down to the wire.
Yeah, most definitely. And this boss is one of the most difficult boss on Tyrannical. You can see Yoda dropping very, very low. You can see it's very hard for JB to recover the healing here, but they did manage to get up. We see the Nettles on Shakib here as well. Now, the Nettles are actually very an important ability here in this fight because it hits a random player, it does a lot of initial damage, and then it applies some sort of grievous effect to them. If they are not healed above 90%, then it will just stay and continue to do damage. And the problem is that the aura of the next sister that is active actually does 50% minus healing. So if you still have the Nettles on a player while you transition to the next sister, then it's going to be very difficult to heal the debuff away.
Very difficult, and not just that, but difficult with the initial pull, because that's the sister that started with all of this trash, which is why they're committing their bloodlust and wanting to get out of that phase as quickly as possible. You just can't sustain non-stop through a 50% healing penalty on top of the group right now. It seems that Abrakeydabra is starting to pull slightly away with this one. They're about 20% ahead on that second sister and about to move over to Sister Briar, the final one of the three. Both teams sitting pretty at 6% right now for trash, after which we've seen kind of two strats go on here. Some teams opt to just kind of skip the danger swing full of captains and of course the Rune Weavers, whilst the other just does a mass pull in there.
Yeah, so Elsewhere is actually completely out of mana for Abrakeydabra side here, as the Nettles go up on Dr. J. Now, thankfully, Dr. J is a rogue, and he has a lot of defenses to make sure he's to survive here, and the boss is that soon. But if this boss would last any longer, then they probably would wipe, because Elsewhere again, 0 mana, and that's one of the problems for Mistweavers compared to rest druids.
But fortunately for them, that is not the case, as they did down the boss, and once again, they get the mass stealth in. We see Speed Pot being popped here by Divinefield as he grabs all the essences and speeds down into this very dangerous hall. These captains do a tremendous amount of damage, not to mention the guards with their Shadow Cleave in front. Here comes a Soul Charmer, here comes the Rune Weavers as well. Some more captains and guards join the fold. This is a very, very dangerous pull. You already see the Absorb, the Life Cocoon come out on the side of Abrakeydabra from the Mistweaver, just getting a bunch of Absorb in on Divinefield as they rotate their cooldowns perfectly. Exact same pull coming in here for Method and NA right now as they cleave down the explosives. Lots of damage coming in though as Yoda dips below 20% health, and a bit of struggle here for JB as Nerfclap gets one of the cleaves in front of him. You can see that curse debuff. Shakib takes a chunk too, and Nerfclap just cannot be healed above 20%. Finally gets chunked back up as they kite down the hall, and all eyes on Nerfclap right now as he manages to stabilize.
They were so close for Method and A. I think it was an explosive warp that went off, but the whole team just dropped very low all of a sudden. So this is the danger of explosive, especially as they mentioned, Shakib is their main explosive killer, and maybe this is why they're struggling with it. Maybe Yoda's not really used to doing it, and this is the advantage Abra has with the double rogues. They have 2 rogues to deal with the explosives, so in theory they could be doing big pulls and have the rogues just kill the explosives while Ashan is dealing with the damage.
Yeah, Shina just gets a chunk of it there and pops his, I believe, Death Pact, if I'm not mistaken. So he gets a defensive rolling there right away as they do the big pull in the hall here, getting ready to proc their first Reaping and combine it with everything out here. Method and A once again exact same pull, but Abrakeydabra beats them to the first Reaping wave, 22% on the board, and will soon be poured in with these Reaping Souls. Elsarat is going to need to make sure to get those Dispels on Divinefield on point, not to mention the extra amount of damage going off on the rest of the group. Spirited Defense casts are going off. There are a couple of captains, if I'm not mistaken, present in the trash here. Extremely dangerous mobs.
Yeah, there's just so much tank damage going on top of all the divas. As you can see, Abrakeydabra is dropping so low. Divinefield has this curse that I've been talking about. Divinefield is going down, and this is what I've been saying. They do not have a curse to spell because they don't have a druid. So no one can dispel this curse. The curse increases the damage taken on the tank. And we see the tank for Method and A go down too. As they don't, and Lighty going down. I think this is a disaster for Method and A. This might be a full wipe.
This is a disaster on both sides right now. Both tanks are just not stay alive as the battle res has already come up on the side of Method and A. Nerfclap goes down again, and JB follows suit. The rest of the mobs rush in and go back to the start of the dungeon where the players have released, and that's their only checkpoint present right now. They try to get back in and cleave everything down. Yoda goes down. No cheat death available now. He releases and tries to join the fold. Abrakeydabra is certainly coming out on top of this situation. Sloppy for them, but they only had 2 deaths as they managed to stabilize in the courtyard at 30% trash. Method and A here just having a struggle right now.
The exact same thing happening for both teams as the tanks go down for both of them, but Abrakeydabra managing to just recover. You know what? It might actually be because the DK was able to rest and Elsewhere could just continue doing whatever he was doing. Well, on Method and A, maybe JB was the one resting, using that cast time, the global, to get him back up, and then other people were dying. And Abra also has 2 rogues who, if they get aggro when a tank dies, they can just riposte, right? They're going to survive for a long time. While other people like a Monk or a DK will not survive. So the comp actually an advantage here for Abrakeydabra.
And one of the biggest problems really is that we know, Kara, once one of the tanks dies, all the threat is gone. All of the mobs are going everywhere. So exactly what you said, the advantage goes on to the remainder of the melee that inevitably have aggro. But really dangerous pull coming in here from Abrakeydabra. They've pulled the Soulbound Goliath in this tyrannical setting. On top of the trash with Matron Brindle, Divinefield is barely hanging on. He already died earlier, so he does not have a cheat death trinket available for about 4.5 minutes now. Elstrat doing what he can to keep everyone nice and healthy, but he himself is at 50%. Divinefield getting another bleed from one of the Thorn Guards there as Matron Brindle has finally fallen over, but the Thorn Guard does need to be killed, and they do need to consider resetting the Soulbound Goliath soon. Otherwise, Divinefield's going to end up just getting one shot at one point.
Yeah, so the one disadvantage I have here in this boss with the Mistweaver instead of the rest of it is that the Mistweaver actually can get stunned by the Thorns, and it did happen earlier for them. Well, on Method and A side, the Druid can just shapeshift into another form, and he will be immune to the Thorns. So that can definitely be a problem, but you can time it properly so you don't have the boss in the fire while a Thorn is going to come out before or after. But we see Alstrat just drop so low.
Yeah, there's a lot of work going into those fires. Every time you go into the fire, of course, it resets the boss's damage stacks, but an increasing pulsing fire damage on the group. So you have to have the perfect ebb and flow balance of making sure that the tank is not getting gibbed, but that you don't overpull for the group. Here we go, Abrakeydabra pulling the remaining Thorn Guards and Thorn Shapers, on the side of the dungeon to try and proc their second Reaping here in a moment. Now, these Thorn Shapers, you want to make sure you're interrupting that the Soul Essence cast. You don't want that getting the Soul Fetish cast getting off. We saw that be absolutely disastrous from some of the teams the other day. There's a Soul Fetish going off right now. It actually did get off, so if that Thorn Shaper dies, it's going to pass a 50% damage and 50% haste stack on to various trash mobs in the area.
So there was actually one explosive who just barely got killed at the very last millisecond. If that would have went off, I think people would have died as they've already been low HP. And this Soulbound Goliath seems to not be losing HP. While Alstrad is so low on mana. We've been talking about this. Mistweavers struggle with mana as the boss gets dragged into the fire, and there's more AoE damage for Alstrad to heal away. And this boss is still on 54%. They've been taking a very long time to single target this boss down. If you compare it to Method NA, they're already ahead on boss damage, and they've pulled the boss later.
Yeah, this is actually really scary. Now, Elstrad is tapped on mana. Abrakeydabra is about to proc their next Reaping Wave. They do so right now. Divine Field is barely hanging on for life right now as a bleed hits the group. Here comes the Reaping Pack. Elstrad, no mana. He's going to need to force Dispels on Divine Field every 8 seconds as often as possible to make sure there's not too much damage on top of the already destroying Tyrannical boss Soulbound Goliath that is increasing damage stacks. Divine Field so low, dipping, and he actually goes down. They don't have a Battle Res available. This is indefinitely going to be a full team wipe coming in here for Abrakeydabra. Ball is now in Method NA's court, who has not procced their second Reaping yet, but is taking it a bit slower as Soulbound Goliath is at 17%.
This has actually been really unlucky for Abra, as Elstrad has been gotten almost all of the Thorns, and Divine Field dropped very low. Elstrad got the Thorns, was not able to heal Divine Field, and Divine Field just goes down. Just a disaster for Abra coming in, as Elstrad, as on the Mystery, were just getting all those Thorns. Now, this time around, they had the disadvantage with their comp. Beforehand, they had the advantage, but this is going to cost them a lot more time than Method NA's 7 deaths cost them earlier, because they have to kill the whole boss from again. So they're definitely behind at this point. While Method NA is already down in Goliath, they didn't proc their 40% Reaping Wave yet, but still, just one whole boss behind.
Yeah, one whole Tyrannical boss behind versus a Reaping Wave is just no comparison here. Method NA is well ahead at this point as they pull the Thorn Shapers with the Thorn Guard on the side that really ultimately spelled Abrakedabra's doom just a few moments ago. They deal with those individually in order to proc their second Reaping Wave, which I assume they're going to end up carrying into a fairly larger pull. We'll have to see exactly what they plan to do with that, but Abrakeydabra wasting no time getting right back into it as they get back on the Soulbound Goliath, who is at 85%.
Yeah, so Method NA dealing with... So one more thing to note, though, I think Abrakeydabra actually copied this strategy from Method U, if I'm not completely mistaken, that they were pulling those Thorn Shapers in the corner on top of the boss. I don't think that was something Abrakeydabra did before, but I definitely know that Method U did this. If I'm not mistaken, Method NA pulled it after the boss, so a little bit of a safer strategy, but it worked out for them, as, of course, Abrakeydabra had this full team wipe. It might have been a reason why they were struggling in Goliath, because, of course, pulling trash on top of a boss costs is more healing required for Elstrad, and we see Method NA doing a pretty huge pull. We see all of them drop very low. JB actually going down.
Oh,
Shakib just barely surviving, but Nerf Clap is also going down.
No, Shakib barely gets the battle res off. That just became about 30 seconds ago for them, and he's just barely trying to stabilize right now, but Bleed's going out left and right. JB's getting low, Nerf Clap getting low again, and they're just trying to cleave everything down right now. JB just does not have the global cooldowns left. Shakib goes down, no battle res available as they try to clean up the rest of the Reaping Pack on top of that huge pull they did. So what they did there, Kara, was they actually grabbed the 40% Reaping Wave with the entire Hall of Maggots, which is already so much splash damage, and he just needed so much attention on Nerf Clap in the form of Dispels, not to mention the area denial from the Lost Souls. It was just too much to handle. They do manage to stabilize, though, right at the very end, but at what cost? With 2 extra deaths right now, and here come the rest of the Devouring Maggots.
There's so many maggots. You can see the whole floor is covered in them. You can see the debuffs on the players. You can only see 3 debuffs with this UI, but they might have even more than 2 on each player. It's just so much damage to heal for JB. Thankfully, there's nothing else going on other than the maggot spit debuffs on everybody. But you can see just how difficult these pulls are, with JB just struggling so much to heal everyone as a 60% Reaping Wave is coming in, and Nerf is just dropping so low.
He's just having so much struggle. Shakib finally joins the fold. He had to release and run all the way around the edge of the dungeon. Nerf Clap getting a Dispel as frequently as possible from JB right now. They snowballed all of the trash and the second Reaping Wave into the third Reaping Wave along with this Rune Weaver right here. And finally, a breath of relief for Method NA as they accrued 2 more deaths on the board and used their only battle res available. Not going to be available again for 7.5 minutes or so as they aggressively pull all of the survivalists in the room right now to make sure they cleave them down. Abrakeydabra still working on, as we mentioned earlier, a boss that takes so long. It's at 15% HP still, and they haven't even started this very dangerous maggot haul that Method NA is now wrapped up.
I think there's still anything that can happen in this dungeon though, because even though Method NA is ahead, I mean, you can see they have 9 deaths. There's still things that can happen to them, and this is one of those dungeons they said they didn't really practice that much because this is really the only time they're gonna have to play it if they lose the upper final against Method East. So they didn't really put a lot of time into this dungeon, and you can see two casts going through. This might be a wipe, as everyone has 2 divas just doing so much damage to the whole group. Thankfully, this tyrannical and not fortified, so it does a little bit less damage, but still, everyone just dropping so long. These are mistakes that really can't happen because this caused a wipe to exactly this team in one of the cup plays. They wiped to this exact pull, and that's why they lost the dungeon.
They're so fortunate this is tyrannical because those double singing not double but twice a double a serpent cast that one out right now. I mean, that would have easily killed someone. You saw how low Yoda got there too, but 70% for Method NA, and I mean they're kind of just stumbling through this dungeon at this point. They grab all of the trash in the room with Rawl, as it's expected to see from teams these days, and up comes the Bloodlust. Huge amounts of damage coming in here from the Unholy DK in just a moment. It starts ramping up and the damage meters are flying up. Nerve clap on top of it, the tank, but Shakib says no and just starts out DPSing everyone in the group as the trash just melts around them, soon to be proccing their 4th Reaping and combining that with Rawl, taking advantage of that Unholy DK damage as Abrakeydabra has done their own substantial pull. They're down but not out right now, and they're about to proc their 3rd Reaping Wave. They did that haul a fair bit cleaner and have as a result caught up a fair bit to Method NA.
Yeah, definitely. I've been watching Abra doing this pull, and it looked so clean. People did not drop low at all. They had no deaths whatsoever, but now we see the warrior, the Divine Field, actually dropping very low on the next pull here, as they have the Reaping Wave 60% on top of some more trash here. But Method NA already procced their 80% Reaping Wave, so they're 20% ahead, and they're already fighting on Rawl. So Abrakeydabra needs to catch up a little bit here if they want to beat Method NA at their own game.
That they do, as Abrakeydabra is dealing with actually the same survivalist pack, if I'm not mistaken, at least most of the survivalist pack in that lodge area. Indeed, they're just finishing up the rest of them right now, 66%, and a bit of scary moment there for both tanks actually, as Divine Field dropped low, as Naguro was commenting there. Nerve Clap as well had some issues and dropped sub 10%, but they managed to stabilize. I'm not sure if we had any of their trinkets dropped. We'll have to see once they drop combat. Sometimes the UI does not update it until after that. Rawl now at 40% as they pull a few maggots from the kitchen, including the Rune Weaver. Actually, it's just the Rune Weaver. They left the maggots in there, and they've already dealt with those.
Yeah, Method NA definitely has enough trash already now to be able to just go down into the last 2 area in the basement, and that's going to be enough trash so they don't have to backtrack afterwards. Now, Abrakeydabra has had a strategy on the first day where they would backtrack. So Abrakeydabra actually played against Method EU in Waycrest Manor, and they did lose, and they also played this strategy again where they do not have enough trash in the basement, and they would have to go back out afterwards. But this time around, they killed this room with the marksman, so they should have enough this time.
Not just that, but they did this really weird thing where they killed Matron Alma downstairs that nobody ever does. She just has so much health, and even on top of it, then she snowballs into the Reaping Wave later. But that's not really a concern for them, as you mentioned, because they just procced their 4th Reaping Wave on top of Rawl, something that Method NA has done as well. So these teams, once again, I don't want to say neck and neck, but certainly a much closer gap than what we saw with that full wipe on Slowbound Goliath for Abrakeydabra. They are 67% behind on this boss and 3% behind on trash. That's certainly not enough for the 2 death difference between the teams. 10 seconds is not enough to cover that, but there's no battle res available for about 3.5 minutes here for Method NA. So if anybody dies, really, that's it. There's no way to get them back up.
Yeah, definitely. And also interesting to see that Abra is actually changing their strategy here in Waycrest Manor, just watching other people play, other teams play, and say, you know what, we're going to change our strategy. I don't like ours. We're just going to do something else, do what Method U and the other team has been doing, and see how that goes. As Method NA is shrouding past this trash area here, going down into the basement, on their way to the next boss, and they're most likely pulling the boss with the trash, which we've seen from other teams before, because again, they don't really know where the other team is. They just have to do their own thing. They have to. They don't know that they're ahead. So they're pulling the boss here with the whole trash, and things can definitely go wrong here.
Yeah, they definitely can. Now, this trash pull isn't as dangerous as what we saw upstairs with the maggots, and of course, Rawl's trash as well. You just want to make sure to move out of the warding candles dropped by that Soul Charmer that we just saw there. It decreases damage taken by 50% right now. There's an explosive spawn in the back that's going to hit the team. Fortunately, everybody is nice and healthy, so they just managed to heal right through it. The other thing is you want to hit that Soul Volley. That's the main interrupt that you want to focus on. There's not too many others because they also sapped one of the Mark's sisters on the side. That does cast that Soul Fetish that could be quite disastrous, so they're just kind of dealing with it in a more controlled manner, because outside of just the Soul Charmer on this fight, the boss is not too dangerous, especially on something like a warrior tank that has the spell reflect on the frontal.
Yeah, the only dangerous thing in phase 1 here is the random damage that Lady Waycrest does while she's just shooting things at players randomly. That does do quite a bit of damage, but easily healable. And there's no affix that really makes it much more difficult. If we would have Grievous or something, then of course it gets a lot more complicated. We see JB actually having one of the split debuffs here, the Disease, that could in theory be dispelled by Lady, but he chooses not to use that global to increase his damage, of course.
Yeah, of course.
And JB is just fine.
I mean, how silly of you to assume that a DPS would use a global for support or any form of defense. Lady Waycrest has finally joined the fold here as they enter the second phase of the Lady and Lord Waycrest encounter. She has siphoned her sets of 30 life over, her 30 HP over to Lord Waycrest, and has joined the fold at 10%. Nerf Clap did not have his Spell Reflect available for that frontal. You have it available of every 2 to 3 or so, depending on the frequency of the cast and when the phasing happens for Method NA. Abrakeydabra has finally killed Rawl and is indeed as well stealthing downstairs to pretty much do... at this point, there's not really much creativity left with the pull, so they're going to do exactly the same pull that Method NA did, but they're just hoping that Method NA has a bit of a struggle. It's the only way they're going to be able to win this map, but we have a battle res coming up in about a minute or so, so that's a bit of safety net in favor of Method NA soon.
Yeah, one more thing to note is that Abra does have the Boralus, which they just popped for this exact pull, and they have a 10-second difference when it comes to death timers, but Boralus plus 10 seconds is probably not going to be enough to make up for the gap between Method NA and Abra right now, because let's be honest here, I think Abra took a long time on Ral, longer than Method NA did, because it looked like they were getting closer, but now they just pulled the boss so much later than Method NA, so there was a long downtime in between these two. And now Method NA is done with the boss. They're on to the way to the next boss. And what most likely is going to happen is they will pull the horse on top of the boss here and just deal with them while JB is jumping on a latch, making sure the horse are not jumping around.
Yeah, that's exactly what they're going to be doing, as Goraktul is indeed pulled line of sight, and the group hugs the wall tight to make sure that none of the explosives that we see in the distance there are going to affect the group, and they safely go off without harm. But the one spawning nearby, immediately Yoda runs down and cleaves, making sure that the area is nice and clean of any explosives. Gloom Horror is at about 60-70%. Getting to start rotating some form of crowd control on them to make sure that there's not too much damage input on Nerf Clap.
Yeah, we just saw a lot of explosive spawn for Method NA, and Nerf Club actually dropping very low, as all of them just drop low at the very same time. And of course, when they're not jumping, then they're all just going to hit the tank at the same time. But Nerf Club did recover. His HP is back up now. And one thing we've mentioned before, Jack mentioned especially on the desk earlier, is that when you stand on this ledge, which you have to prevent the horse from dying, then a Restorer can still DPS the boss with dots and Solar Wrath. Well, on the other hand, when you're a Mistweaver, you can't really do anything from this range. As we see one explosive actually go off for Method NA and everyone dropping very low, but they should be able to recover because there's not that much AoE damage going on as long as you play the Slavers properly.
Yeah, and they actually proc their last Reaping Wave too, so we can see a bunch of the Risen Souls in here. The rest will be joining in just a moment because they're located in very far parts away of Waycrest Manor right here. So in they come. That should be no concern compared to the 9 Gloom Horrors that they had to kill earlier because of the teaming environment that we are in here. And Goraktul hits 50% for Method NA as Abrakeydabra is still just chewing away at the second phase of the Lord and Lady Waycrest encounter.
Yeah, Abrakeydabra, just this one wipe on Goliath just cost him so much. It looks really good for Abra, as Method NA had this kind of a struggle on the trash as they had their tank die and people just continued to die. And Abra was actually having the upper hand. But then they did this one risky pull with Goliath where they would pull Thorn Shapers in the corner of the room, Elstred just completely out of mana, Divine Field dropping low, Elstred getting getting the thorns, not being able to heal, and it just cost them so much time. As Method NA are about to win the first game here, as they're about to down Gorak Tool, they already do have the 100%. The only difference between them is the 10 seconds death timer, but there's no way Abrakeydabra is going to kill a boss in 10 seconds.
Yeah, there's absolutely no way that's happening. Gorak Tool 15% here. And yeah, I mean, that was just a big misplay. There was like no communication, I guess, on Soulbound Goliath, where they took a chance because Elsarat, when they pulled that pack, was already He had no mana left. But Gorak Tool here at 5% for Method NA as they look to close out the first game and take a 1-0 lead over Abrakeydabra. Cheers come all around, and certainly we did not see a Dr. Waycrest Manor here today.
That we did not salute, and we still have not been able to see the wins for the Mistweaver Monk, unfortunately. But Method NA looking very confident, very happy to be able to get that first map in the series down, and that'll move us on to Freehold a little bit later, Sours.
Oh yeah, it looked like Letty couldn't even believe that they win.
Right?
They won
Yeah.
there. Like they didn't feel like
9
they
deaths.
Yeah, it was bad. It was bad from both teams, unfortunately. It was a little bit worse for Abrakeydabra. And we've already seen also Abrakeydabra do the Ataldazar, or Ataldazar, which will be the third map in the series. But Freehold next will be exciting. So this wipe from Abrakeydabra was so brutal. Poor Elsarat got rooted by the boss. He got tangled up right as the Reaping Wave spawned. There's nothing he could do. Now, actually, if he had played a Druid, he could have actually completely immune that mechanic, unfortunately, and then he would have been able to keep the whole group alive, and they would have been able to recover just fine. But on the Mistweaver, that's not available, and everyone just goes down. But Method NA, they had their own share of struggles. Some of these crazy pools in these hallways, there's so much damage going on. There's explosives, there's spits, there's everything. These guys were not having a good time either.
Yeah, and it really kind of shows them how they were a little bit shaken, a little bit disappointed maybe getting into that first game. And we definitely found, that Dr. J and the rest of his squad was feeling a little bit exhausted. So from both teams, I'm kind of curious what you think on this one, Salute. It seems like everybody we've seen today has had these sloppy side performances and still done okay enough, but not quite what we expect from a top 4 team.
Yeah, if they didn't step till 5 a.m. partying last night, then they wouldn't have been tired today. So I'm not to blame for this. But jokes aside, yeah, I don't think the sloppy play, I think a lot of it is nerves, because at this point, fatigue is, I know teams keep coming back to this, but how much less of an opportunity to not be fatigued can you have? Like Cyrus, you and I always talk about this. You have a 3-day schedule here. It's really quite light. The rest of it is just to take care of yourself and make sure that you're not practicing into the wee hours of the morning, because it is important to be rested for this. One small slip up and that'll cost you, that can cost you the entire map. That wipe that we just saw on the screen there where JB died and Shakib rezzed him, Shakib just maybe half a second before that pulsed to 4% health. If that had just gone just a bit more, that would have been a full team wipe, and that could have been a completely different match for them. But these teams are well versed in having a loss and then getting their mind back on track, because we're going in the Freehold next and this match is not over.
It's definitely not over, and we'll have to see how these two teams square off on the other side of this break. Don't go anywhere. Game 2 coming up right after this. We're in Sydney, Australia for the MDI Spring Finals, and in the lower finals, we are going to be going into Freehold in Game 2 as Abrakeydabra is down in the series. And Freehold's been a pretty close dungeon for both teams here, Nagura.
Yeah, so we've seen both of the teams play Freehold already yesterday. And one team, Method NA, was 17 minutes and 15 seconds, while Abra had 17 and 26. So both of the teams had 0 deaths. They had a perfect run, but 11 seconds faster for Method NA. So this means Abra definitely had to change up their strategy a little bit, because if both of the teams play perfectly and Abra loses, then that's not good for them.
I've got a strategy for them. Get more 5 procs.
There we go. That'll work.
More big insight coming in on this one. They're going back to that standard composition that we all know and love to be able to see on this one, Salute.
Wait, hang on a second here. The Mistweaver didn't work again?
Whoa.
I mean, listen, man. All right, Jack.
I know.
There's a reason this meta is so grossly consistent. It's because it's just too strong. And I mean, I don't want to point it all at that point, but if Elstrat was on a Resto Druid in the last dungeon, what happened wouldn't have happened, and they might not have wiped on Soulbound Goliath.
Well, you don't want to point it out there.
No, no.
Game 2 coming up between Method NA and Abrakeydabra as the latter is facing elimination in the Freehold.
Back into the land of the Freehold, brothers, as we start on up here. Both teams going right up. Now, we've seen some teams actually pull some of the 9-pack at the bottom, usually, but it's just more inefficient because then you end up doing a 14% plus a 6% for your first reaping. So both teams actually just, as usual, grabbing their first 20% right off the bat. And we do know Method NA, Nagura, JB talked about this, they found a bit of a sneaky strat to not have the tank be thrown around by the Shattering Toss.
Yeah, so they're jumping up a ledge, doing this whole snapping spot thing where the healer gets targeted by the throw because he's the furthest away target, ranged target, by the enforcer throw, but because he's standing on the spot, he's not actually an eligible target, and they just kind of don't do it. As Nerf Club actually drops very low proxies from down the bargain trinket, but he should be able to recover at this point, as he's, okay, now he's back on normal HP.
Yeah, I'm not liking this this kind of shield wall play there from Nerf Clap. He pops shield wall out of desperation after already proccing his cheat death trinket, essentially dying really, instead of using it as a blanket to mitigate a lot of the incoming damage. So just a little too late from him there. And but he does sneak away. Won't have that 6-minute CD active later. A lot of trouble coming in here for Abrakeydabra as well as Divine Field starts to defensively kite. A lot of sloppier pull from them. They just don't know this trick that JB did there. That saved Method and a ton of time. They've already procced their first reaping and are started on the first boss.
Yeah, interesting to see that Abra is actually so slow. It might just be the Sanguine again. I mean, Zara has talked about this, that Divine is actually usually really good at kiting the mobs with Sanguine, but every time we see a Sanguine dungeon today, it just seems like they're struggling a lot, as we saw in the King's Fest earlier, where the mobs just healing here and there, and this time around, it just took them so long to do this trash too, where you're wondering, maybe the mobs healed again on their pull because they were so much slower compared to Method and A. They only get 2% more trash, so that's definitely not going to make up for the boss HP that they're losing here.
Yes, Sanguine has been hugely detrimental to this group right now, and in fact, I actually think they overpulled. There was a crack shot with full health on the side there, and it looks like they dropped aggro via Shadow Meld, so that it just kind of ran away. So that Shadow Meld should be active by the time they go past the Enforcer on the next bridge, but nonetheless, they finally managed to scoop up the first of this reaping wave and grab it over to Sky Captain Craig, who's just finished his first phase at 75%, and the players will be dancing around the outside while we know Elstrat will be on the outside, opposite side of them, baiting all of the Guano down. Now, Method and A is only 2% trash behind because they just pulled exactly what they needed to, had a perfect pull with a very sneaky strat, jumping on that roof, and it shows. They're now a good 20% ahead of Abrakeydabra on the boss.
Yeah, Abra definitely needs to catch up somehow, because that 20% is not going to be caught up lightly to Method and A, as, again, I mentioned before that Method and A just had a faster time on stream yesterday in this Freehold dungeon, so Abrakeydabra already behind. As you can see, if you look at the damage also, it's just a slight difference between, of course, healer DPS is not very detrimental here because the healer has to be out, so all they can do is really cast that Solar Wrap, as you can see in Method and A's side. But Yoda actually dropping pretty low, but Sky Captain Craig already about to go down on Method and A's side, while Abra is still on 25%.
Still on 25%. Sky King Crag is about to fall right here for Method and A as they get ready to skip the next Enforcer on the bridge. Now, teams are just hugely inefficient to deal with this, so either somebody kind of pulls it to the side and vanishes, or you'll just Shadow Meld at the end of the bridge, whatever it may be. Shakib getting crit on the way in, though. That's not what you want to see. That's a huge hit. He got crit from that Enforcer going in, chunking down to 17%, but no death, fortunately, there for Method and A. That would have been very unfortunate. Abrakeydabra here, about to down Sky Captain Craig at 3% and follow suit down the bridge. A lot of this is really going to be determined to what kind of pulls they do, really, for the mass amount of trash coming in and how well they control that bursting Nagura in front of the Council of Captains and, of course, the Ring of Booty.
Yeah, we see Method and A doing the same strat as the last time, as JB just walks off, making sure he starts the RP event here. So he talks to that NPC here, and then once he talks for a while, he will spawn the pick that you have to click later on. And now he will stealth back, while the rest of the team just deals with some of the mobs here with the neutrals and the trapper. Now they have to be careful here when they kill those neutrals, because they actually do apply a debuff to the group, so you want to be careful that you don't die. As Nerf Club actually drops so low, he goes down!
Oh no, Nerf Club goes down. He doesn't have his trinket available from early. We saw it proc on that trash, and I mean, what goes around comes around, girl. We mentioned it with that sloppy play, and some of that not pre-pop shield wall has cost him the death here. Battle res has come up, not going to be available again now for about 6 minutes as they struggle to kill the rest of the trash here in the corner. Only the trapper is left, making sure to move away from that Sanguine as the next round of traps go down, and JB has shapeshifted in order to eat them and not get rooted and take the bleed. So he's trying to help his group out here. Nerf Clap is now stable, hopefully well rebuffed by the group, and they will move on to the Council of Captains, an opportunity that Abrakeydabra can certainly jump on here.
Yeah, and those neutrals, they do apply bursting to the whole group, so probably happen either they rolled the bursting or they stacked it too high. Of course, when your healer is not here, you have to be very careful. Of course, they know that their healer wasn't here, but definitely something went wrong, and also the fact that the trinket wasn't available, as Abrakeydabra also struggling with the bursting as everyone drops very low, but they actually just refreshed their bursting in the last second here, which is something the healer never really likes to see.
No, but it does have the Tree of Life. I know you're not a big fan of that, but the Tree of Life is there for Elserat, and he's just pumping out the regrowths as much as he can, conserving the mana as much as he can as well, backing out of the Sanguine Divine Field here, making sure that they don't make too many more of those mistakes. We saw them have a lot of trouble with King's Rest Sanguine earlier today. It actually ended up costing them the match because of it, and we already saw some sloppy play with it before the boss, so they're doing what they can to rectify those issues as Abrakeydabra is about to proc their second Reaping, and Method and A sitting at not a pretty 50% health across the board for the team as JB struggles to heal over time. The rest of the group procking their second Reaping and usually pulling it into the Council of Captains. We'll have to see if the teams do that, and indeed they do. Well, at least on the side of Abrakeydabra.
Yeah, so Abra is actually, they're not that far behind anymore. They already engaged the boss. They have the Reaping Wave. Method and A also engaging the boss. They do have 4% more trash on Method and A side, so that's the only advantage Method and A has. And this boss, we've been talking about it already. It's Jolly and Raoul that are active, so not the most difficult combination of bosses here that they have to deal with. Eudora is usually the most difficult boss that they don't have to deal with this time around. And there's also the brews on the floor that kind of help you out sometimes, depending on their RNG, of course. You do want to have the bad brew because the bad brew damages the enemies, and it actually does more damage than if you have a good brew on your team.
Yeah, and I'm kind of just watching the brew management that you're speaking about. The problem is Method and A is having a real inconsistency with them. We're only seeing the brew applied. Like, why is Lighty not have the brew right now? There's only 1 to 2 DPS at a time getting these damage increasing brews for the Method and A side. Once again, Shakib and Yoda have it, and Lighty is certainly in there. He might be helping a bit to make sure he manages these mobs on the side, but we're getting a 3 set of buff brews over on Abrakeydabra side, and it shows they only started the boss about 10% before Method and A here and finished it 30 to 40% before them. Excellent brew play from Abrakeydabra there as they mass stealth immediately and head over to the Ring of Booty.
And they also got the extra 4% that they were behind on trash while fighting the boss, so they definitely ahead at this point. It's good to see that Abra actually just increased or made a better strategy, or a faster, more efficient strategy from the last time around. As they're in the Ring of Booty now, you see Divine Field going up the bridge here, probably pulling 2 or 3 trash groups together. And this is one of the more difficult trash groups because they have a lot of fixate mobs, which can be dangerous if you don't immediately soothe it away or have a stun to interrupt it.
No stuns indeed. Captain Jolly finally going down here for Method and A, who's about to hear the call of booty and head over to the Ring of Booty themselves and start to grab the pig Lightning, making sure to start the RP for Ludwig von Tortolen. Abrakeydabra, 44% here, has done a pretty substantial pull on the side. Divine Field said, I've had enough. I've made sure the mobs are low enough, and he heroic leaps out of the group to make sure that they slowly trail behind him and drop Sanguine in a nice line as he safely sits on the other side and gets ready for the bursting onslaught onto the group. Method and A doing I don't want to say huge pull here. Actually, did they pull the patrol as well? There's a pretty substantial pull, I suppose, here. About 8 to 10 mobs right now. Nerfclap indeed this time did pre-pop his shield wall to make sure that they're nice and stable off the bat.
Yeah, so Abrakeydabra having 5 stacks of bursting there. Elsewhere just barely managed to out-heal the stacks in his Tree of Life form. Now, one thing to note as well with this affix combination, I've talked to Celia of Method EU, and he actually hates the affix combination in this dungeon the most out of all of the combinations from the land here, just because a healer has to deal with the bursting when the mobs go down, but then your team also wants you to use your Typhoon to make sure the mobs are not in the Sanguine. So you have to heal plus Typhoon, make sure you're in the right position. There's just a lot of things for the healer to handle here, and you can see it, just the healers just having so many things to do. Both the healers struggling a little bit here as Abrakeydabra proc their 60% Reaping Wave and are fighting Ludwig.
Excuse me, what's his name?
Ludwig?
That's right. Say it all. Don't be shy. Method and A here about to proc their 60% as well with Ludwig von Tortolen. In just a moment here, they're going to kind of pour it in and take advantage of that Unholy DK. Same thing that Abrakeydabra just did earlier. Huge damage coming in, but Ashrine actually ends up going down. This is not a good situation for them. They do have the Battle Res available from Elserat, who is back on that Resto Druid, gets Ashrine up immediately and makes sure the group is healthy as the bursting stacks start taking down. Not too much trash present there. Ludwig von Tortolen about 30% health or so. He has a lot of health, especially in this fortified environment. So they're well bit ahead here of Method NA, but certainly have blown a bit of the lead with that death. That extra 5 seconds that they had favor out of Method NA is now gone.
You see Dr. J actually proccing his cheat death and also standing in the Sanguine for a little bit there, as Waycrest was also standing in the Sanguine, just giving Elstred such a difficult job, as Elstred is completely out of mana. If you can look at his mana bar in the top in the raid frames, he goes into cat form because there's nothing else he can do at this point, just trying to finish off the mob so he can get out of combat and get a drink off to get his mana back. You can see the DPS in both of the for both of the teams, as both the healers try to do as much damage as possible, both of them doing approximately 10 10k DPS as well, while also trying to heal the whole group, which is difficult again with these Apex combinations here.
Indeed, and they run upstairs and do a pretty substantial pull here from Abrakeedabra's side. Actually, it's only an 8-pack here, so it shouldn't be too bad for them, as they want to make sure they maximize the amount of downtime that they have while Trothak, the third boss of the dungeon, spawns in the ring, which takes usually about 25 seconds or so. So they want to maximize their output. Elstrat has had his drink. Divine Field once again heroic leaps out as the group gets low to make sure that he can trail that Sanguine along to the ring, and hopefully stands on the edge of the ring to not get too much Sanguine in the ring of booty, because they don't want that area denial during the Trothak encounter. Divine Field using that time to grab a couple of the neutral mobs on the side so that they can well control the bursting coming in and get near that fourth reaping. But so much bursting coming in here, and Jay actually dies because he procced the cheat death earlier. Divine Field hanging on sub 20%, and Elstrat just barely managing to heal through the rest of that bursting with, once again, the Tree of Life, Nagura.
There was a very bad refresh of the bursting here. They had 4 stacks and then refreshed it at the very last second to give it a 5 stack. There was such a bad just control of damage by Abrakeydabra. That was definitely the damage dealer's fault to not control the bursting properly. Elstrat tried his best to heal him up with this Tree of Life, but Method and A at this point, they caught up a little bit. If you look at the percentage now, Abra just is on 80%, but Method and A is 78%, so they're not far behind at all. Now Abrakeydabra did engage Trothak, and they are popping their Bloodlust, while Method and A is doing the exact same thing, just a couple of seconds behind. So this is a very close game, and if you look at the death, it's 2 deaths for Abrakeydabra versus 1 for Method and A, so it's only a 5 seconds difference, but it can matter because they're so close to each other.
Yeah, I mean, this is they can afford those extra 2 seconds because of the death difference, as you mentioned here. And Dr. J, once again, what comes around. He procced that cheat death earlier in a most silly fashion, just getting a bit of extra damage on him, and just didn't have that available for the death. Trothak now 55% for Abrakeydabra, while 63% for Method and A. They started the boss virtually at around the same time, perhaps a couple of seconds later for Method and A. So Abrakeydabra is certainly showing some extra single target damage prowess here, as Method and A tries to keep that gap at only about 10% on Trothak, but they do have the advantage of the extra death on the side of Abrakeydabra. Both teams have 1 battle res available to them, and it'll all come down very soon to what they're going to do and how they're going to handle Harlan Sweet's Cannonball Barrage with the surrounding trash. Finally, Method and A starting to close the gap a bit to 5%.
Yeah, you can see the damage a little bit closer now. So Method and A pumping some more damage at the very end, as you can see. Now, just keep an eye on the damage to compare the 2 teams. Now, one thing to note, though, of course, is that you can't always say, "Ooh, this guy's doing more damage than the other guy. He must be better." It's all about cooldown timing and reaping, of course. There's a lot of AoE that is basically useless damage on the reaping. Any sort of cooldown or AoE slash can kill mobs like with not a lot of HP, and sometimes rogues or people that don't get a lot of single target damage from AoE just hold back their damage to let other people do the AoE because they actually gain single target damage. So make sure you don't pay too much attention when there's a reaping wave on top. And then of course the Proud Warrior damage is also just a lot of clapping. Clapping.
But speaking of single target prowess, Method and actually comes out on top on that encounter. And, you know, I really got to beg the question here. You know, JB out DPS'd Elstrat there. Elstrat was at the end of the exact same pull as Method and A, and JB had 70% mana left. So a bit of mismanagement of resources there, and JB's extra damage certainly didn't make up for the 10% difference that were between the 2 teams, but it helped. Nice bit of Lord of the Rings view there on Abrakeedabra's side, on the right side, as everybody crosses the bridge together. Both teams at 80% apiece. Advantage to Method and A as they do the exact same skip at the exact same time, but Method and A's advantage of 5 seconds of death difference between them and Abrakeydabra could come into play here, as we see a death grip come in on one of the Buccaneers from the bottom, and they engage Harlan Sweet on the side of Method and A.
Yeah, Abrakeydabra actually pulling the middle pack straight away with Harlan Sweet here, which is something we haven't really seen from them before. Now, one thing to keep in mind here is that it's Sanguine. You 100% do not want to drop a Sanguine behind underneath the boss. And of course, we also have bursting, so you want to be very careful with the bursting, especially on a boss fight, as Divine Field just drops very low, as you can see here. But Elstrat does have the Tree of Life, he should be able to keep up the tank. And they have to be careful to not roll any of the bursting stacks anymore, because they haven't been so good at it earlier in the dungeon.
I mean, these Enforcers are going to be an absolute nightmare soon, and it's so questionable on where they're going to die and where the boss is going to be positioned at that point because of the Shattering throws. The tank is just getting tossed left and right, and you could have a bad Shattering throw on them, as Harlan Sweet is doing a slight cast with his slicing winds. You kill one of the Enforcers on top of it. Somebody's not paying attention with their ROP. There it is, finally, the Ring of Peace bump. They're not paying attention to the Ring of Peace or the Typhoon, and you can get a lot of healing on this boss that has a fair bit of HP, even in this fortified environment. But absolutely neck and neck here between the 2 teams. teams. Only about 1% ahead for Abrakeydabra, but they have the 4% trash advantage. Not really the biggest deal in the world, though, Nagura, because we do know these teams are going to use the Cannonball Barrage and, of course, the Ravager's Painful Motivation to kill a lot of the trash very quickly.
Yeah, definitely not a big difference here in trash, and you pull it on top of the boss anyway, so if you just passively cleave the trash down and still single target the boss, then it doesn't matter if you kill it now or later, so this difference really doesn't mean a lot. And now the 5 seconds from the death counter might actually matter so much between those two teams. As you can see, Harlan Sweet just 50% on Abra side, while Harlan Sweet on Method and A is just like 4% behind, and it's a 45 setting, so the percent really doesn't mean that much at all.
No, it doesn't mean that much. Well, it means something, I gotta say. You gotta kill the boss from 100 to 0. But the Harlan Sweet here at 45% for Method and A. Abrakeydabra starting to get just slightly ahead. They're at 6% lower than Method and A for Harlan Sweet, but they are behind on the trash by 5%. But as we mentioned, they're going to just pull something with these Cannonball Barrage. It already looks like they're getting in position with Harlan Sweet to grab something else as Divine Field grabs him over and takes the Commander pull plus the 2 Buccaneers right now. A particularly saucy pull here as the Officer is quite damaging to the tank and quite debilitating for the rest of the group right now. Here comes the Cannonball Barrage. Harlan Sweet 25%. He's already entered his double damage phase.
Yeah, so Abrakeydabra should be able to kill Harlan Sweet here before. They also pulled extra trash that they need to get the 100%, while Method and A only needs 3%. So they have the 100% now on Method and A side, so they will proc the Reaping here as Harlan Sweet is about to go down for Abrakeydabra. This is going to be so close, as the only thing left for Abrakeydabra is the 3%.
99% trash on the board. Harlan Sweet about to go down. Dr. J goes down for Abrakeydabra right now. They just can't finish off the rest of this trash as Method and A finishes it up and grabs the dungeon from underneath Abrakeydabra. What a disappointment at the end for Abra, and Method and A comes out with the sweep. Woo! That was a close one.
It was incredibly close as Method NA does take that victory, punching their ticket to BlizzCon. They got to feel really good after that one, Sours.
Oh yeah, that was such a death by 1,000 cuts, unfortunately, for Abrakeydabra in this dungeon, where there's just a couple of small mistakes here and there. They've had a lot of games today, right? They had the first 3-game series and then straight into a 2-game series after that. With a Waycrest Manor, there was a lot of things going wrong, and then some of that perhaps could have carried over. They didn't seem fully composed in Freehold, and this dungeon was incredibly close when we saw these teams run it earlier in this tournament, and it was still incredibly close here, even with the death differential between the two teams.
It got so close, and also when we were looking at the end of that boss Nagura, there's so little mana on the side of Elzar out there. It was so dangerous as they're going into another aggressive pull. I was getting like Waycrest Manor flashbacks already.
Yeah, definitely. And you saw the bursting come out everywhere, and there's a tank was getting thrown around. Everyone was low HP, and Sanguine everywhere. It was such a close match, so it's good effort from both of the teams here, but Method is slightly better.
Hey, and that's sorry, go on.
I was going to say that the final pull there, not only was it aggressive, but there was a bit of issue with it as well, because I'm pretty sure there's kind of a range cap to the Painful Motivation. And what happened is
3 only. Yeah.
No, a range cap.
Oh,
a range
okay,
cap.
Yeah.
And what happened is one of the Ravagers that they pulled started casting Painful Motivation like 30 yards away as the rest of the mobs came in, so they never benefited from the damage, and that's probably where the last trash percentage are missing right at the end.
And at that point, it was just a mess of like random bursting damage going out as they're trying to be able to position themselves. And you guys kind of touched on it as well, Sloot, where having a quick little cheat death proc or something like that, something that was completely avoidable, actually really messed with them later on.
It happened twice. It happened kind of on either side of the teams here, either side of the fence. One happened to Nerf Clap early on, where he kind of procced his trinket early in the trash, and it came back to bite him. He kind of misplayed that shield wall early on, and then he ended up dying. And then Nagura, as you mentioned, Dr. J procced that cheat death earlier, and then just came back to bite him too, and he got finished off.
It was too many times throughout all the games today. Minor mistakes, minor errors have come back to haunt a lot of these teams, and I'd love to be able to have the back and forth between both of them at the very end, Sours, where it just came down to a little bit extra deaths and the damage that Method NA was able to pull out.
Oh yeah, it was the last 30 seconds of this dungeon were absolutely crazy, and we saw some of the mistakes earlier in the dungeon as well, where we had the Nerf dying on Method NA, really bad, but they were able to recover quite well. They had a Ring of Peace, and they were able to keep the mobs away from the rest of the group, and they were able to res them back up and be just fine. And then we had a Shine go down to a Turtle Shell during the Ring of Booty, which is something that you really can't have happen. And then Dr. J dies just a little bit later as well. So many small mistakes here adding up, and they're going to be Method NA now is going to be going up against Method EU in the grand finals, which has not dropped even a single game this tournament. They're looking pretty indestructible. So having the kind of tight series that we had like this maybe doesn't looks so good for Method NA moving into the grand finals. It could be a really convincing Method EU victory now, I think.
Well, we'll have to see what Method NA thinks on that one as we go on stage with Fist and Lighty.
Thanks, Jack. I'm here with Lady. So you've qualified for BlizzCon. How does that feel?
I mean, it feels great. That was like the bare minimum that we wanted coming into this tournament. So hopefully we can go all the way.
All right, great. So you were apprehensive about going to Waycrest today. How do you think it went?
Well, we didn't actually play it at all until this morning. So we weren't that confident. We had a few good practice runs. We just kind of yoinked someone's strat and went with it. And then almost pulled it off. One orb went off, and that's all it takes in that dungeon.
Yoinking strats, is that itself a strat?
Absolutely. So we could only play Waycrest if we lost. So our goal was obviously to just beat Method EU in the upper finals, never play it at all. That's the goal. That didn't work. So,
I mean, fair enough. I mean, it works, right? So that's all that matters. So you're now going up against Method EU. Did you anticipate getting this far?
yeah. I mean, we expected to play them in the upper finals and then again in the grand finals, no matter the outcome of the upper final game. So hopefully it'll go better this time. I think the maps are good for us. Like, our problem is we have really good times if we can put it up. So hopefully we just, throw together a clean run.
I hope you do. And what does the desk think?
I think that this time they are ready and as prepared as they've ever been, and history's a little bit repeating itself, Sloot. As we mentioned in last year's MDI, we did see Jay's team take third, Method NA took second. They really don't want to be able to repeat that one. They want to be able to seal the deal, and as you mentioned, this is the bare minimum for the team. They want to go all the way.
Yeah, it was awesome to see the confidence there from Lighty, but JB and the team, and even when we interviewed them, they're kind of stuck in this mentality and curse of second place, always getting second, even in some of the time trials, second, always second to Method E throughout the entire cup. So you're right, history is repeating itself 4 times over right now. So hopefully they can kind of break out of that funk and start to drop a game off Method EU. Method EU feeling extremely indestructible at this moment, so maybe even a kind of a chip away at them, even just dropping a game might shake them up enough for Method NA to really squeak a few wins in there.
Yeah, they'll have to find some kind of opening because Method NA sure did find one in that last game there, Sours, as Abra just started kind of falling apart.
Oh yeah, they certainly did. This last couple seconds of the dungeon is completely crazy. So what JB ends up doing with how they route kill counter their dungeon is he goes and roots a mob and it gets the painful motivation off, and it's really smooth and easy for them. However, Abrakeydabra decides to pull this pack of trash into the boss, so there is a painful motivation mob as well as everything else in here. We can see everyone's at so low. While this cannonball barrage is going out, everyone's dropping, and we see the cannonball barrage is killing mobs and refreshing bursting in a way that they really can't have happen. The damage going out is absolutely crazy, and it ends up taking down Dr. J as well as Swagfist. That's like crazy damage. It's a very dangerous strategy. It's definitely not very safe. Those are the kind of things that you can route around earlier in the dungeon. There's a lot of points in time where maybe you could have pulled an additional trash pack so that you don't have to make that crazy pull in the very last couple of seconds of your dungeon when everything can go wrong.
Yeah, and Sloot actually pointed out it was a perfect angle on that last clip there where the painful motivation going off was the big reason why all the bursting kept clipping there.
Yeah, I mean, it was just kind of sat by itself in the corner as they were pulling away. Because the thing, it never connected with them. They should have saved maybe a grip for it to get it in the pack right away. But by letting it cast on the side, not only that, but they kind of double whammied themselves by needing to kite even further away from it for the cannonball barrage. That's just the direction they chose. So it just didn't work out for them in the last few seconds of the map there.